Hello, I'm recording this video in advance of our meeting next week. And what I want to talk is some of the things that we'll do, but also to follow up with some of the things that we discussed in the meeting that I think that it would be great to talk more about. And hopefully it's going to become even clearer why this research is needed. So as you know, this project is all about inequalities, focusing on the prescription of medication to prevent a second stroke. And I think it's important to know some of the things that are already out there that I'm sure you already know, but that when we see the numbers and when we see the big picture, it's just striking to see the impact that strokes has on people. We know that over 100,000 people suffer a stroke every year in the UK. But we also know that the risk and care people receive is not the same. We call this inequality because it's an unequal care. We know that Black people, for example, have more than twice the risk of having a first stroke. And we also know that 1 in 3 stroke survivors are less likely to be prescribed the secondary prevention medication that they need, which in the case of this project are statins and anticoagulants or blood thinners. This information is not new. There are multiple organizations like the Stroke Association, the World Stroke Organization, and the NHS Race and Health Observatory that have emphasized the need to study secondary prevention by recognizing that people have different identities, something that we call intersectionality, and that I will explain a bit more in one of the next slides. But let's first think about equality. So in an ideal world, we all receive the same care, we all receive the same treatment, regardless of someone's sexual orientation, level of education, whether if it's a man or a woman, regardless of the ethnicity or where the person is coming from. But we also know that that's not true, sadly. There are inequalities. There's people who receive better care based on certain characteristics compared to other ones. And just to give you an idea, we can think of the difference between men and women in terms of something really basic like a salary. So we know that there are inequalities in the salary women received compared to the salary that men have received. But this research is not only about making that black and white comparison of someone's age or someone's sex or someone's ethnicity, but it's looking into more detail how the different identities of a person have an influence in the decision to be prescribed a statin or an anticoagulant. And we can think of different things like ethnicity, culture, age, class, education. They all influence the result of the interaction between the healthcare professional and the patient. And this is because there are multiple things that can be impacting that decision of prescribing the medication that the stroke survivor needs. So we can think of xenophobia when it comes to ethnicity, or the impact of colonialism and the education doctors, nurses, pharmacists have received, but also the education the patient, the stroke survivor, and their carers have been raised on. We can also think of ageism. So that's the discrimination based on someone's age. And that's both ways. We're not talking only about people who are in their late 60s, 70s, 80s. We're also talking about people who are really young who had a stroke and maybe they are not receiving the medication they need because of misconceptions or because of a lack of understanding of the person's needs. There's also an issue with class. We know that there's evidence that tells us that people are not receiving the medication they need because of the level of education or their class. And there's also the role of the systems in general, such as patriarchy, that might put women in disadvantage compared to men. So when we look at the larger picture, we know that we need to move beyond black and white comparisons, because although they help us understand some of the things, some of the challenges that we have, they're not covering all they're not covering the full picture of the problem. And that's where intersectionality, which is what I mentioned at the beginning of this video, comes in. So intersectionality is a theory, is something that helps us understand how the different identities of a person influence the person's experience. So in the context of this research, we're talking about the experience being the interaction, that consultation with the doctor, and whether the person received or did not receive the medication they needed, focusing on statins and anticoagulants or blood thinners. And here you can see some of the things that I mentioned before, such as gender, religion, class, education, geographic location, sexuality, the person's ability, and the race and ethnicity, and how they are linked to different structural systems that put that person in disadvantage. And the reason why I'm focusing on this research, which is something that we talked last week, but is just to remember that we can investigate these characteristics, such as the role of sex, age, social class, how they influence the stroke survivors' prescriptions by using data that we already have, such as data information that we gather when the person goes to the GP, when the person goes to the hospital, or when the person interacts or receives social care. So all that information is already available there. We can access it to study how these characteristics influence the person's chances of receiving the medication. And last week we talked a little bit about it, but I didn't have enough time to explain this to you. So hopefully this is going to make it even clearer. And again, we can discuss it more when we meet next week. So just when you look at the image that you have on your screen, you see a lot of blue dots, and you can see how the blue dots on the left are closer to 0 compared to the blue dots on the rightmost side of the screen. Now, all these dots, and especially the ones that are marked with different colors, they represent women. So these are all women. But as you can see, the ones on the left are closer to 0, which means that they are less likely to receive the medication they need. Whereas the ones on the right, and actually the second to last going from the right, that person there has way more chances to receive the medication they need. And these are all women, or these dots represent women. So what we want to do by conducting this research is to investigate what are the characteristics, apart from being a woman, that influence the chances of receiving a medication, which in this case are statins and anticoagulants. So for example, we could see here with this same image that on the left side, the one in orange, it's a woman, but it's aged, she is age 50 years or older. She comes from a medium income background, and she's of Black ethnicity. Whereas the woman on the rightmost side, the one on the green, this woman is a younger woman, aged between 18 to 29, from a high income background, and also Black ethnicity. So we can see here how even though these two women on the left and the right side, they're both women and they're both from Black ethnicity, we see that age and level of income is influencing their chances of receiving medication. So what we want to do with this research is to understand why might people with those characteristics be at higher risk or of not receiving the medication they need. And are there high risk characteristics that we did not recognize before? So is there anything else that we haven't looked at that might influence the person's chances to receive the medication they need? So that's part of the information that this research is going to answer. So what are we going to do next week? There are two things that we're going to do. So we'll talk about the role and responsibilities of the Express by Experience team who are going to be part of this research. You are now helping me define what these roles and responsibilities will be. You will be invited to be part of the group when the group is once the research starts. So you are already contributing to how you want to make this work. And we'll also talk about the requirements for good partnership working and access. For good partnership working and access requirements. So is there anything else that we need to consider if we were to invite more people into the group? Now, I finished with this slide, but next week when we meet, I'm going to spend more time on this slide because I think it's really important to understand where we're at the moment. So last month, last couple of weeks ago, we had the first meeting where we introduced ourselves and we talked about the research project and some of the things that needed to be clarified. Now, in the meeting that we have next week, we're going to define how we'll work. And again, this is helping us define how much commitment do you think we need to have throughout the project? How are we going to be communicating and how often? Then when we meet next month in April, we're going to start talking about the training. And this is going to become clearer as we progress in our conversations. So I will record a video to explain a bit more about the training and the research in more detail. So you have a better idea of what's expected from you and the other contributors who want to collaborate in this research. And then in May is the final. So I'm going to prepare all the documents for you to revise, and then you're going to be invited to give me feedback on what needs to be to change or to be adjusted before submitting the research proposal in June this year. This is a very lengthy process, so I'm submitting the application in June, but it's going to be, if I'm successful, I would start the project in April next year. So it's going to be a long process, but all these conversations that we're having are really, really important because they're helping define something that hopefully will change what people experience after having a stroke. And again, hoping that that's going to prevent more people having a second stroke. So I'll see you next week, and I hope that you can make it. Thank you very much if you watched this video. Take care.